On this Wednesday night, Canada's fiscal snapshot.
We took on debt so Canadians wouldn't have to.
The deficit now pegged at a massive $343 billion.
It's going to be all of our challenge. We're going to work on that.
Our one-on-one with the finance minister. Pressure from the U.S. president, his push to get kids back in class.
I think it is logistically, legitimately impossible.
Ending racial profiling, the plan from Montreal police, and why critics are skeptical. And buckling under when a bridge just can't take the weight.
Global National with Dawna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We know the pandemic has been a massive economic shock. Now we have a snapshot of just how massive. It's the worst picture since the end of the Second World War. The federal deficit is now projected to be $343 billion. Compare that to last fall before the pandemic. The projected deficit then was just $34 billion. And the national debt is expected to exceed $1 trillion for the first time in Canadian history. About a third of the workforce is without jobs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, though, says Canada is in a strong position to bounce back.
As a federal government, given the historically low interest rates and the low debt servicing costs that we have, and given our extremely strong fiscal position going in, we decided to take on that debt to prevent Canadians from having to do it.
Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, has looked through the numbers of this fiscal snapshot. David, what's the bottom line here?
Well, Dawna, there's no sugarcoating this. The deficit this year is going to be ginormous, 10 times the size of last year's deficit, a tidal wave of red ink.
When you look at the scale of our support, it's 14% of our GDP. A very significant response that we know is going to help us to get through this particularly challenging time.
Finance Minister Bill Morneau says the deficit this year will be just over $343 billion. That's 10 times bigger than last year's deficit of $34.4 billion. In relative terms, the deficit will clock in this year at nearly 16% of the size of Canada's economy versus just 1.5% last year.
Canada enjoys an extraordinarily good credit rating, and the demand for Canadian securities for government debt remains very strong. So I don't think we're really looking at that in terms of it being a crisis or a signal that we're in really dire straits.
The economy will likely shrink this year by about 7%, but a dark warning: if a second wave of COVID-19 comes back and forces more lockdowns, the economy could shrink by 14%, and that would be about as bad as the worst year in the Great Depression, 1930, when the economy shrank by 15%. Looking ahead, the government is signaling some changes are coming to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. But other than that, the document is silent on the future past this year. No path to a balanced budget. No word if key government services will be cut, enhanced, or modified. And there are no changes to tax rates, up or down.
We can give the government a pat on the back for what they've done, but we're not there yet, and there's a lot more to come.
Now, one quirk of the times, with interest rates so low, the federal government will actually pay less this year on interest charges than last year. And think about that. With the debt hitting $1 trillion, the federal government will actually pay $4 billion less in interest. Dawna?
Thank goodness for low interest rates. David Akin in Ottawa, thanks. Let's go to our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stephenson. Mercedes, this is a snapshot, not a full picture. The opposition parties wanted more. What do they say is missing from it?
Well, Dawna, the Conservatives and the NDP come at this from very different angles, as you can imagine. But here's a place where they have common ground on what's missing from this fiscal snapshot. Opposition parties are saying there is no plan for how the government will continue to support Canadian households and businesses as this pandemic stretches on, and that it does not lay out a roadmap to recovery or any specifics on how the government will pay for the billions of dollars they've already spent and how many are going to be spent going forward. The Conservatives want more money for businesses. The NDP say not enough is being done to help vulnerable Canadians. Here's some of what Andrew Scheer and Jagmeet Singh had to say today.
For the first time ever, this year, the net federal debt will reach over $1 trillion. In fact, they're borrowing so much money, Mr. Speaker, that the Bank of Canada has to create it out of thin air.
So we asked the government to put in place a wealth tax on those who have fortunes of over $20 million. Let's ask the wealthiest to bear the brunt of the pandemic.
Mercedes, budgets and fiscal updates are always political documents as much as financial ones. What are some of this government's political calculations right now?
Well, Dawna, there's two separate calculations the government has to make. On the one hand, maintaining power in Parliament. They're a minority government, so they have to find ways to keep opposition parties happy. So far, they've been leaning towards the left and more spending there. But they also have to make Canadians feel that they have their back and will support them if they want to win the next election. Dawna?
All right, Mercedes Stephenson in Ottawa, thank you. And a little later, I'll ask the finance minister about those missing pieces from the opposition, about his plan for the path forward, and how we have to learn to live with this pandemic. Meantime, Via Rail is struggling to cope with reduced demand for travel and plans now to temporarily lay off 1,000 employees. The Montreal-based company says the layoffs will take effect on July 24th. It hopes the move will offset the pandemic's increasing financial blows. The same number of Via employees were temporarily laid off in February because of the rail blockades. The federal Conservative leader was asked today about those pictures on social media from Toronto's Pearson International Airport. Andrew Scheer and Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister were photographed sitting in the departures area on Tuesday. At that moment, neither was wearing a mask. Masks are mandatory for all passengers and staff at Pearson Airport. Scheer says he took his off to take a call, and he added this when asked about it today.
I think the picture's pretty self-explanatory. I think my answer yesterday was pretty self-explanatory as well. And if you want to go analyze social media pictures, if you're looking for some kind of Zapruder film to break down frame by frame, I think that's pretty ridiculous.
Premier Pallister says he made a mistake when he took his mask off and says it won't happen again. In Edmonton, the Misericordia Hospital has now closed its doors to new patients and canceled all surgeries because of an outbreak of COVID-19. It's described as a full facility outbreak and extends to all adult and child services, including the emergency department. 20 patients and 15 staff have tested positive for the virus. 3 patients linked to the outbreak have died. Cases have steadily increased at the hospital since the outbreak first began on June 20th. There's a new picture of how Canada is coping with the pandemic. Federal modeling released today shows by July 17th, the predicted number of cases would be between about 106,000 cases and just over 111,000. We are roughly in that zone right now. Canada's Chief Public Health Officer says transmission is largely under control in most parts of the country.
These dynamic models all tell us that if we relax too much or too soon, the epidemic will most likely rebound with explosive growth as a distinct possibility. This possibility of significant resurgence is not just hypothetical, as this is exactly what we are already seeing in some other parts of the world.
And that includes the United States, where President Donald Trump is putting pressure on governors now to send kids back to school as COVID-19 outbreaks spike. More than 3 million Americans have tested positive, and that's nearly a quarter of all cases globally. 60,000 new cases were reported in the U.S. yesterday. That's the highest single-day spike yet. Outbreaks in 3 states are now worse than any other country in the world. When you look at the number of cases per million people over the past 7 days, Arizona takes top spot, followed by Florida and South Carolina. As Jackson Proskow explains, President Trump is determined to get back to business.
More than 50 ICUs in Florida have reached capacity. In parts of Texas, 1 in every 4 COVID-19 tests comes back positive.
In the next 2 weeks, we're probably going to end up being what New York was 2 months ago.
Despite those dire warnings, the rapid spread of the virus across America is still being downplayed by President Donald Trump.
Well, I think we are in a good place.
As they did with businesses, the White House is now pushing schools to reopen on an aggressive timeline, with Trump making the mostly empty threat to withhold federal funding if they don't.
they must fully open and they must be fully operational.
The Trump administration has gone so far as to attack the advice from its own Centers for Disease Control, claiming school reopening guidelines are too tough.
We don't want the guidance from CDC to be a reason why schools don't open.
New York has said it will reopen under a hybrid model, welcoming students back on alternating days to reduce crowding. Other hotspots may be hard-pressed to bring anyone back, for fear students will spread the virus to teachers and bring it home to their parents.
We have to think about schools in the same way that we've thought about every other workplace and every other environment for play and for social environment, and then say to ourselves, fundamentally, it's really unlikely.
All of this assumes that parents want to send their children back. Just as it called for all schools to reopen, the White House task force told Americans living in current hotspots to stay home.
Is really asking the American people in those counties and in those states to not only use the face coverings, not going to bars, not going to indoor dining, but really not gathering in homes either.
The result? More confusion about what's safe and what's not, at a time when there's no doubt about the terrifying trajectory of the pandemic in the U.S. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Washington.
President Donald Trump signed the new NAFTA deal at the White House today, and only the president of Mexico was with him. The agreement took more than 2 years to negotiate. Even though it's been ratified by all three nations, there are a number of outstanding issues. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau opted not to cross the border for this photo op. He hailed the signing, though, as a success for all three nations. He says he's concerned about the lingering threat of U.S. tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel.
The United States relies heavily on imports of Canadian aluminum in particular for their domestic manufacturing capacity. The U.S. doesn't make nearly enough aluminum to be able to cover its needs, particularly at a time where we want the economies to get going again.
The Prime Minister says there is no justification for levying new tariffs. The NDP leader Jagmeet Singh calls the incident at Rideau Hall last week domestic terrorism. An armed man is accused of ramming the gates with his truck. He was eventually taken into custody and charged with threatening to cause death or bodily harm to the Prime Minister. Singh says if the intruder had been a person of color, the outcome would have been different. Singh compared the way that incident was handled to that of Ijaz Chowdhury, the 62-year-old Ontario man who was shot and killed by police during a mental health call.
Someone showed up to potentially kill the Prime Minister of Canada or with weapons at his residence, and that person was arrested without any violence, and you had a person in his own home who was killed. That to me is what systemic racism in policing is all about, that difference.
46-year-old Corey Hearn, a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, was arrested without incident on July 2nd after police spent several hours talking to him. He's facing 22 criminal charges, including firearms offenses and making that threat against the Prime Minister. Keeping street checks in check. Coming up, the Montreal police plan to end racial profiling. Racial profiling, when authorities suspect a person because of the way they look or the color of their skin, should not be happening anymore, but we know it does, including in Canada. Critics say too often Black and Indigenous people are targeted. Now, for the first time, Montreal is adopting a new policy on police street checks. Mike Armstrong explains what it is and whether it's enough.
The goal of the new policy, according to Montreal's police chief, is to take discrimination off the table. Going forward, his officers will only be able to stop people based on what they see happening rather than who that person is. Chief Sylvain Caron says he recognizes systemic racism and how it has led to disparities in police checks. Well, those disparities are considerable. A report by independent researchers last fall found Black people and Indigenous people in Montreal were 4 to 5 times more likely to be stopped by police than white people. The new policy doesn't really change the interaction. What it does is say explicitly things like ethnicity, gender, or sexual preference can't be the reason people are being checked. The policy also mandates officers log each interaction, including why the person was stopped and their ethnic background.
So the citizen, when he wants to complain, there's a basis now on the way that the police officer has to work.
There are Canadian jurisdictions that have gone further. Nova Scotia just last fall banned street checks. That came after a report in Halifax found black people were 6 times more likely than white people to be stopped. In Toronto, new rules were brought in 2016 and carding almost completely disappeared. Street checks in Toronto dropped from hundreds of thousands each year to just 1 in 2018. Well, critics say Montreal dragged its feet and should have gone further. In fact, some question whether Montreal officers will fill out forms on their street checks.
At the end of the day, are they actually going to do it?
There's also concern that the policy doesn't have teeth.
What the public should know is when they are intercepted and it is discriminatory, what are the sanctions in place and how are they going to be protected?
The chief does say the policy isn't set in stone. There will be an independent review in 2021. And if there's still a problem, promises the policy will change. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
A new report from the Auditor General raises questions about how the Canada Border Services Agency handles foreign nationals. The report done this spring found the CBSA lost track of 34,700 people who were supposed to leave the country. It says the agency has failed to promptly remove most of the people ordered to leave. The Auditor General found the CBSA had not touched thousands of files for years, including some high-priority removals. The report also flagged several other issues, including poor data collection, case management flaws, and problems sharing information with immigration officials. Still ahead, an exclusive snapshot with the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. Welcome back. Canada's finance minister says the pandemic has been an enormous shock to our system, and his fiscal snapshot today painted a pretty grim picture. Mr. Morneau joins me now from Ottawa. Minister, thanks for taking time for us. Canadians are looking for some hope now and for a plan. How long do people need to be patient with this economic uncertainty and worried about their financial future?
I think that what was most important for us today was to give Canadians an understanding of where we're at, give them a sense of the importance of our continued support for individuals, but also for our economy. We've supported people across the country. We've given them a bridge to the future. And now we need to think about how we get to that safe restart. And that is the period that we're in right now.
You've extended the emergency benefits like the CERB once already. Are you going to extend them again?
Our approach really has been very much about thinking about how the various benefits we've put in place can help us to get to the next step. So we see the CERB benefit as declining in importance. There's going to be fewer people on that benefit, but at the same time we are extending and making more important the wage subsidy, so helping organizations to have the capacity to hire back people as we have a safe restart of the economy.
So do you think we're now at a stage where we are transitioning from this being an emergency to sort of being a fact of life, that the pandemic is going to, has gone on for months, will go on for months more, and that you need to build that into your fiscal plans?
What we're trying to do is to build the framework so we can move into that new normal. And that means thinking about the things that we need to do together with the provinces. So we're in these discussions right now. We're thinking about how do we get back to work. So we need to have childcare. We need to have sick leave so people can be off work if they need to be. Municipalities need to have support so they can have transit systems to get people to work.
I wanted to pick up on the point about childcare and schools too, because, for lots of parents with young kids, particularly women with young kids who tend to do the bulk of the caregiving, they can't go back to work until there's a place for the kids. Is there something you're doing specifically for them?
Well, it's the reason the first thing I said, Dawna, was childcare is because we recognize that challenge. We are going to have to work together with the provinces. So we've put out a $14 billion investment with the provinces. We are working through the approach in that negotiation right now. So we need to think about that, and it is, as you say, inextricably linked to the school system, which again the provinces are going to need to be working on.
The NDP believe that the ultra-rich and the big corporations are not paying their fair share, such as companies, they point out specifically Amazon and Netflix, who have made huge profits during the pandemic because of the pandemic. Are you considering taxing them and increasing taxes of the very rich?
This has been something I've been working on for a couple of years as Minister of Finance. We're working with the OECD to try to get to an approach for the taxation of those huge internet giants, and we've made significant progress. I am, cautiously optimistic that we will get to an approach that will make sure that they're paying their fair share of taxes.
A final quick question. We're all anxious about the future. What's keeping you awake at night at the moment?
For me, I worry about jobs first and foremost, and getting the economy up and running means we have jobs for people, and that to me is the thing that allows the economy to work, to get us to new opportunities, to get us to growth. So, in the job as Minister of Finance, you have to worry about a lot of things, but having Canadians working is fundamental. And if we can get there, we can get through this challenge together.
Minister Morneau, thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
And you can watch the full interview on our website, globalnews.ca/globalnational. Collapse caught on camera next. The moment a Nova Scotia bridge falls into a river. Well, this bridge crossing didn't go as planned. It happened near Canso, Nova Scotia. The truck hauling a crane was gingerly inching onto the bridge, guided by a man walking in front of it, but they didn't seem to factor in the weight of that truck. One person is in the hospital for observation. The bridge was set to be replaced this summer, and crews were moving in the equipment when this happened. We are watching a powerful summer storm that's crossed over Canada's largest city. Some of the pictures from Toronto are wild. A severe thunderstorm watch is in place across the city tonight. It has pounded that city with powerful winds, hail, and sheets of torrential rain. There's flash flooding, too, causing a hazard on a number of streets. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Dawna Friesen. We leave you with a much calmer scene in Waterton Lakes National Park in southern Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.